Hello, everyone, and welcome to Geographic Information Science. My name is June, and I'm your instructor for the course. And I just wanted to do a simple video lecture today to kind of introduce the syllabus and everything, and we can kind of get into the actual class next week. I know everybody's a little stressed right now. Things are a bit up in the air. I figured it was a little bit easier to just do it this way and kind of get into things as we go along. So I have up here the course Canvas page. You'll notice it's fairly bare bones. I haven't put much effort into it. And that is because, well, after a year of teaching online, I really hate Canvas. But no, I have put all of the course content on GitHub. So we'll only really use this Canvas page to access your assignments, do any communication, email me or me send out notifications to you all. There's also a course discussion page, which I'll talk about in a bit. One thing to note, there is a start of term survey, which I would appreciate if you filled out. If you do it by Monday, then yeah, you'll get 5 bonus points in the final exam. But yeah, so as I mentioned, almost all the course content is going to be hosted on GitHub. This is just a site that allows me to share code, data, and also publish web pages. You don't need to know GitHub to interact with this. So you can find the syllabus here. I've just got it open. So yeah, I just want to use today to go through the syllabus, overview the course, give a brief expectation of what you can sort of hope or expect to get out of this course. So this syllabus is a bit of a living document, so it's going to be updated as the semester progresses. So you'll be able to find links to all the assignments as they're posted. So as material comes up, I'll put it on here, and it'll be available on the schedule, which I'll talk about in a minute. But briefly, this course is just meant to expose you to the key concepts and tools that are used to collect, map, and interpret geographic data. So this is meant to be a very broad, holistic introduction to GIS. We're going to learn about geospatial data and how it can be used to aid decision-making, complement scientific analysis, assist with urban planning, inform policymaking, things like that. So the goal is for you to gain practical experience working with geospatial data, using it to solve problems in both the natural and human realms. So just some of the things that we're going to cover this term. Broadly speaking, how GIS functions and how it can be applied to solve problems. And then within that, we're going to learn how different phenomena are represented as geospatial data inside of a GIS. We are going to implement some geospatial analysis methods, just a broad introduction, things that you can build on if you want to pursue GIS in the future. We're going to cover some general principles of good map design and talk about how you can visualize geospatial data, and more broadly speaking, just visualizing data in general, communicating your results. You can have the most well-rounded analysis out there, but if you can't convey what you've done, you can't convey your results and findings, then that analysis is pretty much meaningless. So good map design is very important. We'll talk about sources of error in GIS analysis and output. One of my personal favorite things to talk about are the ethical implications of GIS and geospatial analysis. At least for me personally, when I was learning GIS, this is something that wasn't talked about very much, but I think it's very, very important. So that'll be a recurring theme throughout the semester. And then lastly, you're going to work on GIS workflows and collaborating to complete a GIS project at the end of the term. So GIS is a very collaborative discipline. Oftentimes, when you're involved in real world projects, you find yourself working with multiple people. And so that's an important thing to practice. Before we get into anything else, I just want to introduce myself a little bit. So again, my name is June Skeeter. And so I'm a white settler and immigrant from the United States who's been living as an uninvited guest on Coast Salish territory for 6 years now. I'm non-binary and my pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm a geographer, researcher, and an educator, and I'm very passionate about social and ecological justice issues. And my principal aim this semester is to provide a holistic introduction to the study of GIS and the application of geographic information systems. So I've been teaching GEOS for about 6 years now. First, I worked as a TA for this course, and now over the past year and a half or so, I've been working as an instructor. So mostly online. I do have some prior experience doing in-person teaching. But for this course, I've developed a ton of online content. So now we're shifting to a hybrid model, and I think a lot of the online content that I've developed can integrate nicely into this blended learning method. And so my aim in teaching this course specifically is to show people how to use GIS as a tool to help make the world a better place. I want to give you the tools and show you how you can use those tools to apply GIS to things that you care about. GIS is a really, really powerful tool or resource for tackling a variety of problems. Personally, I use GIS extensively in my own research, studying climate change in the Arctic. So there's just a link to a recent publication. I use GIS on like really, really small areas. Like this is a lake basin, and I've been using GIS to try and match up carbon emissions to different landscape types. And then we can work on that to upscale from there. And this is just a quick little video from one of my field sites where, again, I work up in the Mackenzie River Delta of the Northwest Territories. I study something called micrometeorology. I use this fancy equipment here to basically measure the exchange of carbon between the land and the atmosphere, trying to get a feel for how things will progress as we move into the future with this warming climate, things like that. So I'll try to incorporate some examples from my own research throughout the term. More recently, I've also started using GIS to track police violence in Canada. So this is a project that I started up last year. I'm working on creating a database of police-involved deaths in Canada. And so this is very much a rough draft or web page right now, but I'm working on creating an all-out organization where you can interact with and download this data for anyone who wants to engage with it for their own personal research. And I'll also be incorporating some of this, which is acknowledge a very, very heavy topic, into the course. When I'm not working, I like to spend my free time hiking, snowboarding, biking, gardening, dog sitting for my friend. You will likely get to see some pictures of the doggy at some point throughout the term. And so I can be reached by email. You can see it here, skeeter1@mail.ubc.ca, or again, you can just email me through Canvas. And you can also drop in my office hours. So these might change as we go throughout the term and I get a better sense for the demand. But presently, I'm planning on having office hours on Mondays at 2 on Zoom. That's just by appointment. So if you want to attend, that space is open, but I would just appreciate a heads up. And then I will also be available to chat Wednesdays immediately after lecture. And then Thursdays, I will have in-person office hours in room 144 at 2 p.m. Again, Zoom office hours are just by appointment. I'm not going to sit in front of the computer for an hour waiting for people to show up. But if you plan to show up, just shoot me an email to confirm it. I'm also available to meet outside of the hours listed if needed for folks who are in a different time zone or whatever circumstances. And before I get into talking about the specifics of the course, I would just like to give a land acknowledgement. So UBC, and more broadly speaking, the city of Vancouver, are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. Now, BC, more broadly, has a very, very diverse collection of First Nations that live within its borders. And so this map is just a quick resource to get you started, covering some of the larger groups. So the Coast Salish are one large group that are defined, broadly speaking, by language and culture, but there's individual nations within that group. And so I don't want this to just be a formality. hopefully most of your instructors give a land acknowledgement when they start the class, and hopefully most of them take some time to really talk about it. But for those who may not have been exposed or may not quite know why, I just want to talk a little bit about it. So why do we need to do a land acknowledgement? For centuries, settler societies have perpetuated a genocide against indigenous people across the globe. And in many ways, this genocide is still ongoing here in British Columbia and across Canada. That's a fairly hard fact to ignore if you spent any time over the last 4 or 5 months looking at the news. But yeah, there has been concerted effort for decades, centuries really, by government, religious organizations, and educational institutions to erase indigenous cultures and identities from both the land and from the map. And historically speaking, maps have been many times used as a tool of oppression, and we must really work to decolonize our practices within GIS specifically. I'll talk about this quite a bit throughout the term, but the power of a line and how things that can be drawn or represented on a map can then become reality. And maps can be used to shift opinion, policy, and things like that. And so in many ways, GIS has been used as a tool of oppression towards indigenous people. And so as future GIS practitioners, it's everyone's responsibility to work to acknowledge that, and so that we can work towards righting those wrongs. And so a land acknowledgement is just one small way to help with that. It is not just a formality. It is meant as a time to reflect and to build understanding. And so the maps that I've linked below and the information that I'm just about to talk about are all sourced from a site called nativeland.ca. And it's a great resource for working towards building an understanding. It's by no means a definitive resource, but it's a good place to start for looking if you want to know a bit more about the nations, territories, languages, and treaties in your area. And so just broadly speaking, what does this land acknowledgement mean? What does it mean when we say traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory? So traditional is meant to recognize that the lands were traditionally used and or occupied by a specific group. So within the context of UBC, Vancouver Land Acknowledgement, we're talking about the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. And so I've just linked to the native land site for each of these respective nations. If you want to find more information, these are good places to start. You can find sources of information for where they get like the boundaries, for instance. And again, these boundaries are very, very rough approximations of what the actual traditional territories look like. So ancestral recognizes that the land is handed down from generation to generation. It's meant to convey a deep-rooted connection to the land. And one way to sort of emphasize or think about that connection is through language. Language has very strong connections to ancestry. And so the Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh speak dialects of Hunkaminam, which you can find a little bit of information about here. Again, this is just linked to the native land page for this language, and it shows you broadly speaking where this language historically has been spoken. If you go to sources, if you'd like to hear this language being spoken, I suggest you check out First Words. It's a CBC podcast. You can hear Larry Grant, he works at BBC. You can hear him speak the Musqueam dialect of Hunkaminam in this podcast. It's like 6 minutes long, so it's pretty quick and easy to listen to, but I will let folks check that one out on their own time. And then the Squamish Nation speaks Squamish Snitcham. And so again, just a link to the nativeland.ca page. This video is only a minute long, so we're just gonna go ahead and play this here.
Canada is a very diverse country full of many indigenous languages that are very distinct from one another. I'm told that there are approximately 11 main language families across Canada. 7 of those language families are located in British Columbia. The Coast Salish is a very large language family that extends well into the United States, filling most of Washington State towards Portland, Oregon, Vancouver Island from Victoria all the way up to Comox, back to the lower mainland here. This geographic region represents Coast Salish territory, where we have approximately 16 dialects of our language. The Squamish language is one of those dialects known as the Squamish Snachum. We have a very unique language that is very guttural, and it reflects the rhythm of the land. As the wind blows off of the ocean, it goes over the islands, up these valleys, into the glaciers, and it drops into the steep valleys. So we have many inflections in our language that directly mirror that relationship to our territory.
So I encourage everyone to spend a little bit more time just kind of thinking and reflecting, and maybe trying to gain a little exposure, hear a little bit more about these languages. And lastly, for BC specifically, the territorial acknowledgement also includes the word unceded. And this refers to the fact that the land was not turned over to the Crown or the government by treaty or any other agreement. And over 95% of the land in BC was never ceded by treaty. So you can see that a large portion of Canada and the United States are covered by treaties, but the majority of British Columbia is unceded land. Now, what does this mean? And I will talk a little bit more about this in lecture next week, and then it'll come up again probably a couple times through the course. But treaties were in many ways unfair and exploitative, and colonial powers, mainly being the Canadian government and the United States government, used mapping and cartography as tools to their advantage to really draw these lines and kind of exploit the treaties and write them in an unfair way. But nonetheless, a treaty was at least some sort of government agreement or document that gave some form of some framework for navigating and some recourse for navigating certain disputes and things like that. Granted, within the context of a very flawed system that is biased towards colonizers, but the fact that there is no territory or no treaties for the majority of these territories just adds another layer of complexity to the issue. So again, this is meant to be a time to reflect and think about what this means. It's going to be a recurring theme that's going to come up through the course. So on to sort of what you can expect from this course in general. Again, it's going to be a broad introduction to GIS, and I'm just going to talk about how you're going to be graded, what you can expect from that. So this course is going to be taught in a modular format. Each module is meant to kind of cover a specific set of topics. They'll, generally speaking, build off of each other. And so the course is going to have 8 modules that will be posted on the dates listed in the schedule below. Talk about that in just a moment. And then there's going to be a comprehensive final exam. And so the first 7 modules will each be worth 10% of your final grade, but then your lowest scoring module will be dropped. So you've got 7 shots to get 60% of the score right there. And then module 8 is going to be weighted more heavily because it's going to be focused on the final project. So the final project is sort of like the culmination of the course. And then you're also going to have a final exam, which I'll talk about in a moment. So looking at the course schedule, I've listed the modules here with their post date, their topic, and their due date. I've also embedded a Google Calendar just to try and make things a little bit more easy for you. So you can see the days that the modules get posted, the days the modules are due, my office hours, and lecture times. And this should go all the way through the semester. So for instance, no lecture for midterm break. But so you can see the topics here, the dates that they're due, the dates they're going to be posted. Once the module is posted, I will put a hyperlink in this table so that you can access the module from the schedule. I will also post it on Canvas so that you can access it there. Now, a bit about the modules and what I mean when I say a modular format. So each of these modules is going to be posted as a standalone web page on GitHub, similar to the format that this syllabus is in. They're going to be made accessible through Canvas and also be hyperlinked in the schedule above once they're posted. Modules are going to have assessments associated with them that you can submit via Canvas. And basically each module is a lesson that's intended to introduce or cover specific topics within the context of GIS. Again, they're kind of going to build off each other, so you won't really understand module 2 very well if you haven't done module 1 yet. So each module is going to have 3 parts. There's going to be content, application, and assessment. So the module content is just going to consist of readings, videos, and other material pertaining to the topics outlined for each module. So the module content is what I'm going to discuss in lecture. So in-person lectures for this course are going to be held every Wednesday, except for today, obviously, September 8th. So they're going to be every Wednesday at 2 p.m. or 1400 in room 200 in the geography building. Now, the module content should be reviewed before in-person lectures. So I would say that the Wednesday or the scheduled class time on Mondays at 2 would be a great time for this. So we're not going to have in-person class on Mondays. Instead, at 2 p.m. on Mondays, that's when I will post the module. And I'll give you a brief look at a draft for module 1 in just a moment so you can get a better feel for what that's going to look like. So the module content should ideally be reviewed before coming to class in person. Now, again, this class is in hybrid format. You don't have to attend in person if you're unable or uncomfortable. In-person lectures will cover module content in depth and serve as your chance to ask questions and engage in discussion about the material. But if you're not able or uncomfortable attending in person, the lectures are going to be streamed and recorded for students who can't attend in person. Now, I will have to provide more details for that coming up. I don't feel like UBC has done a very good job of preparing me as a lecturer for trying to stream and record things. I feel quite comfortable doing that on my own system, but in the classroom, they've given pretty little guidance. So I intend to have a more well-rounded understanding of that in the next day or so. And I will provide more information about how you can actually access the streamed lecture and the recorded lecture, whether you'll be able to participate or just watch the streamed lecture. Ideally, hoping you can participate via Zoom chat. I'll provide more information for that in the coming days. But yeah, so the module content is what we're going to talk about in lecture primarily. Then there's going to be the application, which is essentially the lab section of the module. So the application will build on the content and give you hands-on practice working with GIS software, using GIS techniques, making maps, analyzing data, things like that. So you can use your lab section time to work through the application, and you can find details about that on the lab access page, which I'll go through in just a moment. So the applications and the content is just going to be like stuff that you work through, and then you're going to have the assessment, which is going to be associated with each module. And the assessment is going to touch on both the lecture and lab material, and it's going to be submitted on Canvas. So each assessment is just going to consist of 2 parts. Basically, you can think of them as essentially together, but just I'm separating them for everyone's own convenience. So the assessment is going to have an automated quiz and a marked assignment. So basically, there's going to be a variety of questions embedded throughout the module that are going to be either things like multiple choice, true, false, numeric input, questions that can be marked automatically. Those you will submit via the automated quiz. So for the automated quiz, you'll be allowed multiple attempts, so you can try until you get the right answer if you want. Don't feel obligated to do that. But with these automated quizzes, you'll get your grade immediately after submission. And again, there's no limit on attempts if you want to retry things. So this will be questions based off content from both the like the lecture portion and the lab portion. And then there's also going to be a marked assignment associated with each module. And so this is also going to be submitted via Canvas separately from the automated quiz, because these are either written responses or file submissions, and they're going to be marked by your TA. So given that that will take a little time to turn around, I wanted to separate the automated stuff so you can get at least some feedback quickly, and then your marked feedback. I'll discuss that in a moment in the course policy. The final project is sort of the culmination of the class. And so it's going to be assigned in module 7. So basically modules 7 and 8, the lab portion, will be working on the final project. And so the project is a group assignment that's going to be completed in groups ranging from 2 to 4 people. If you have a situation that requires something else, you're going to need to at least get prior authorization from each person. So if you need to work on the group alone, touch base with me to get approval for that. I'm not saying you can't work alone, but I encourage everyone to work in groups. So the reason being, GIS is a collaborative discipline, and so your project should be done with a group unless special circumstances necessitate otherwise. I'll give more info about like what you can really expect from this and a bit more guidance on how to go about it later on in the term. And then there's also a final exam. So the final exam is going to be asynchronous. So it's going to be on Canvas, and it'll be available for completion between December 13th and 15th. So I think 72-hour window to complete it. Basically, it's going to consist of a handful of essays, short answers, a diagram or flowchart type question, and then a GIS task. It's not intended for you to take 3 days to write it. You should be able to do it in 2 or 3 hours, but I don't like the idea of time pressured exams. That's not the way the world works. And I'll give more details about this later in term. And also if for some reason that specific date window doesn't work for someone, I'm willing to be flexible on the time. So I want to talk a bit about labs and what you can expect from that. So a major part of learning in GIS is centered on hands-on application of GIS. So a lot of your time for this course is going to be spent working on lab content. That's the application portion of the module. So each week you're going to have a 2-hour lab section, and this is your chance to ask a TA for help and work through the assignments with your fellow classmates. So lab 1A is going to meet synchronously, but remotely on Zoom. All other labs will meet in person at their scheduled lab times. Lab attendance is very strongly encouraged. However, it's not mandatory. We're not going to take attendance or anything. I would say at all times you should be registered for one of the following lab sessions. If, for whatever circumstances you need to attend a different lab section, that's okay. However, priority for access to the specific computers will be given to students registered for that lab section. And again, I'll give some more details in module 1 pertaining to how exactly you can go about completing the labs. But yeah, so labs are going to meet every week of the term, with the exception of week 1 this week, and week 10 when there's reading break. So half the week is canceled. We're just going to cancel all labs that week. The lab section on Monday, October 11th, which is Halloween, will instead be hosted on alternative day. Haven't determined which yet. So here's the lab slots. The lab room is 115 in the geography department. You can see the times, and you can find the Zoom link for the Zoom lab here. I've linked to info about the TAs for your respective lab sections here. So I will let Carla and Mike introduce themselves in their lab sections. Now, one of the real key things here with working in GIS is that we need specific types of software. And so most of the labs in this course are going to require you to use a software package called ArcGIS Pro, put out by a company called Esri. Now, this is a proprietary software package. What that means is it costs money. It's actually very, very expensive. License for this is multiple thousands of dollars per year. Now, you don't have to pay that money, thankfully. But if you want to continue using it as a private citizen, you will. Now, I will cover open source alternatives. That's free software that can be used to do basically the same things. And I'll talk about that later in the term. But the department wants me to teach you how to use Esri's ArcGIS Pro because it's one of the leading GIS software packages out there. It's what most professional organizations and government institutions use. So we've got a couple options for accessing the computers or accessing ArcGIS more specifically. So option one is the geography department lab computer. So the geography department has computer labs, room 115 and 237. They can be accessed in person when the geography building is open, or you can access them via remote desktop connection 24/7. The building is open, I think, 7:30 to 5:30, Monday to Friday. If you have an evening class, then you will be granted later access. Otherwise, you can't get into the building after 5:30. They've reduced hours because of COVID policy, I guess. Now, with the geography lab computers, there is a $20 lab fee. And so every student is going to be given access to the geography lab computers. If you wish to use a geography lab computer with a geography logon, then you have to pay the lab fee. And so I just got confirmation from Jose. You pay the lab fee and then you will get your logon credentials. It used to be that we'd give everyone logon credentials and then you pay the lab fee. It's been switched. So you can follow this link, pay the lab fee, and then you will be given logon information for your account. So yeah, I will edit that. Don't email Jose after you pay the fee. He will automatically be noted. Jose will send you your logon credentials after you pay the lab fee. So if you want to use a geography lab computer, just follow this link. Now, you can use that logon to access the geography computer in person, physically, or you can use it to remotely access the geography lab computers. And so we've got instructions here in this document that you can use to set up a VPN connection, which is necessary to connect, and then you're going to have to use remote desktop connection. So we've got some instructions here for how to do that with Mac or Windows. So more information about the geography lab computers can be found here. In particular, check the schedule. If you're going to be doing a remote log on to the geography lab computers, you want to avoid trying to log on when there's an in-person class or an online class in session for that room. So if you want to remote log on to work on your lab, don't do it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday, because that's when Geog 374 is in that lab. But it looks like room 239 is open at that time on Wednesdays. So just check the schedule before you try to do anything. Now, we have another option. It is slightly more costly, but also slightly more flexible depending on your specific circumstance. Your other option is to purchase a student version of ArcGIS Pro and install it on your own computer. Now, normally a license for ArcGIS Pro costs about $2,000 to $3,000, but you can get a 1-year installation as a student for $30. I need to edit that part out, but anyway, $30 will get you a student license. So the caveat here is that ArcGIS Pro runs on Windows. If you have a Mac or a Linux machine, you can get around this by building a Windows partition on your hard drive and using a virtual machine. That said, we aren't tech support. The TAs and I can't really give you any guidance on setting up a partition for your hard drive. It's usually a fairly straightforward process, but again, we can't really advise you on that. So there are instructions here if you want to try to create a partition. But again, we can't really give you guidance. So what you should do is, if you're working on Windows, check to make sure that your system meets the requirements. You can follow this link. Then you can follow this link and use it to purchase GIS software. Now you'll notice that it says ArcMap is being retired as of 2021. You can kind of disregard and ignore that. And you're going to click this link. It'll probably ask you to log on. And then you can use this to find the software package that you want to approve the request. So you can just type in ArcGIS, and it will come up with a link to ArcGIS desktop, and it'll say this product is ArcMap, not ArcPro. Now we are using ArcGIS Pro, but for some reason, UBC software doesn't really have their stuff together yet, and they're only selling ArcGIS desktop. So there's just one extra step for accessing. It doesn't make anything more complicated. It just means you have to wait a little bit longer. What you do is you follow this step, you add it to your cart, you purchase it, you pay for it. Then when you get a receipt, because ArcGIS Pro is not directly available for download yet, you take that receipt and you email it to Jose. Jose is the lab tech. You email it to Jose at labhelp@geog.ubc.ca. Jose will then send you a link to download Arc Pro on your own computer. The third option, this is just a last resort if you're in a pinch or if you haven't been able to get your login set up or you're struggling with something or say your computer crashes. You can remotely access the GIS labs in the Kerner's library. You can follow this link for information on how to do it. So remote access to those labs is available. This is not a viable long-term solution. Space is somewhat limited in those labs. Also, if you step away from the project you're working on, there's a timeout set up so that if you, I think, leave it inactive for 10 or 15 minutes, you might get kicked off. So it's not an ideal solution for your workflow for the full class. But if you're in a pinch, either say module 1, you haven't been able to get things set up yet, or say in week 12 your laptop dies and you have to use another computer, you can use the library, and it's just accessing it through a web browser, so you don't have to go through the remote desktop setup. Again, don't do this for the full term, but if you need it in a pinch, it will work. Now, this section is going to be filled in a bit more. I'll discuss it more in depth for talking about introducing the lab assignment for the first module. But it's really important to just take note of how you save your work on the geography lab computers. So these computers are accessible by anyone who has a geography logon. And so in a given classroom in 115, a single computer might have 20 to 30 different users in a week, especially if you're counting remote logons, right? And so the C drive, which is where you work on that computer, is accessible by any user. And so each of those logons, any data that you leave in the C drive is at risk for getting deleted. Instead, with your geography logon, you are assigned a server space allotment on the H drive. And so this is a secure space that only you have access to. And so I suggest you store your data there. Remember the mantra, work locally, save remotely. We'll cover this more in depth next week. If you're working on your own computer, handle things however you like. whatever setup works for you. Regardless of whether you're working on your own computer or you're working on a department computer, what I personally suggest you do is use some sort of remote backup. So some sort of cloud-based file management service, Google Drive, Dropbox, whatever, and use that to back up your work. This is good practice in general outside of the context of GIS or this course specifically, but it can be helpful here. So the reason being is that a cloud-based service will make it easier to share your data or work with like group members when it comes time to do the final project and things like that. So it really makes it a lot easier to collaborate, but it also is just a very safe, secure way to store your information. Again, if you're working on your own computer, what do you do if in week 12 you drop your laptop and it breaks? If you have everything on a remote backup option, then if you have a lab assignment that's due, you can just log into the GIS computer on the library while your laptop's being repaired, and you can just download the data that you already had halfway worked on. Again, I'll give more information and flesh this out a little bit more once it comes time to actually start working on labs. In the meantime, what I advise you to do is think through option 1 or option 2, try to decide what you want to do. If you are a Mac user, I suggest you just use the geography lab computers. It will probably be easier than setting up a partition on your own hard drive. If you're comfortable doing that, go ahead and do it. If you are a Windows user, I suggest that you probably just go ahead and purchase the student license for Arc Pro. Yes, it's $10 more, but it will give you a bit of added flexibility. You won't be tied to a specific workstation in the lab, so it might make it a little bit easier to social distance in the lab if that is a necessity, or if that might make you more comfortable. You'll have the option to kind of work wherever rather than being tied to a specific computer. Also, in the event that circumstances force everything to go fully online, if you have ArcGIS Pro set up on your computer already, it'll make the transition to working out from outside of the lab a little bit easier. Hopefully, that's not a situation we encounter. But generally speaking, I think it would probably be easier for folks to have it on their own computer if you're working on a Windows system. If you're working on a Mac, unless you're very comfortable with the idea of partitioning a hard drive, I really don't suggest you do it. So I'm just going to wrap up this long rambling introduction with a brief overview of the course policies. So my aim this semester is to provide as flexible and supportive of a learning environment as I possibly can, while at the same time respecting my own personal boundaries and those of the TAs. So these course policies are just intended to establish a framework for navigating the course. They may be updated as we go along. So first off, marking and feedback. So again, the assessment portion of the module is going to have 2 parts: an automated part that's just going to be marked for you by Canvas, and then a marked assessment portion where you're going to submit written assessments and maps and things like that. And so those parts are going to be marked by your TA following a specific rubric that's going to be associated with each lab assignment. And so the assignments, any assignments that are submitted by the due date will be graded and returned within 7 days of the due date. So 7 days after it's submitted, you'll get your grade. Now, this is pending a discussion with my TAs. It may be adjusted slightly as we progress through the term. My aim is to give quick turnaround on the assignments, while at the same time respecting the fact that the TAs do have a lot on their plate. So that may be adjusted slightly, but for now, the target is 7-day turnaround. So short comments are going to be provided where applicable, possibly using some sort of coded system so that, like, the TAs don't have to type out the same thing over and over. But if you want further feedback on your assignments, just shoot your TA an email. So the TA that is TAing this lab section you're registered for is going to be the one marking your assignment. So you can have discussions regarding feedback or anything like that directly with them. Now, I'm trying something a little bit new this semester in light of everything that's going on. I'm really trying to be flexible. In the past, I've assigned late penalties for late assignments. I'm going to try something different. So rather than doing late penalties, any submissions, any assessments will be accepted without late penalty for 7 days after the due date. So basically, if you submit something by the due date, you're guaranteed that you're going to get prompt turnaround on it. It's going to be marked quickly. You're going to get feedback. But while we will accept late assignments for 7 days without late penalty, any assignment that is submitted late waives their right to prompt grading, prompt turnaround, or detailed feedback. So any assignment that is submitted after the due date is going to just be marked whenever it's convenient for your TA. So say the module assignment is due. So I have it set up now that modules are going to be due at 2 p.m. on Mondays, right before the next module is going to be posted. So if you submit module 1 by 2 p.m., then you are guaranteed that you'll get prompt turnaround feedback for your assignment. Say you submit it at 3 p.m. It's very highly likely that the TA will just go ahead and mark your assignment as well when they mark the rest of them. But say the modules are due at 2 p.m. and then the next day, the TA starts marking all the assignments. They finish marking everything by Wednesday or Thursday. Now, we're not going to post the grades until a specified date to just kind of maintain uniformity. But say you submit things on a Friday evening. This is after the TA has already gone through all the other assignments and marked them. Your late assignment is not necessarily going to be marked. If the TA wants to, they can, but I'm leaving that up to them. So if you submit a late assignment, it may not be marked until the very end of the semester. It really is dependent on what's convenient for the TA. So again, I don't want to penalize people unduly for having late assignments, but at the same time, we need to be firm about our boundaries as instructors and what, and I need to be, flexible as far as what I'm asking of the TAs. So if you get things in on time, you will get prompt turnaround on marked assignments. Things that are turned in late are just going to be marked whenever is convenient for the TA. 7 days after the due date, the submission window is going to be closed and we won't accept any more submissions. Okay, with that said, talking about accommodations, if you require accommodations for disability, please contact the Center for Accessibility. If you are already registered, please just shoot me an email to make me necessary of any accommodations. So just shoot me an email in a timely fashion. Right after you finish watching this video would be a great time. Regarding academic concessions, again, especially considering the circumstances, my aim is to be flexible here. If you require an academic concession, just shoot me an email and we'll work together to try and figure out an accommodation that works for your situation. You are by no means obligated to explain yourself to justify your personal circumstances. My intent is to be accommodating. I'm going to give you a concession if you request it. That said, if you, while my aim is to be flexible, it is your responsibility to communicate that need in a timely manner. So if you shoot me an email in November asking for a concession for module 1, chances are I'm not going to be as flexible and accommodating. It's your duty, it's your job to advocate for yourself in a timely fashion. If you do that, I promise I will be flexible. Also, if you require multiple concessions, I might refer you to arts advising as well. Regarding communication, there's a course discussion board on Canvas. I should be able to see it here. I haven't posted it yet, but there will be a course discussion board posted on Canvas. There will be a course discussion board posted on Canvas. So general questions about the course, just ask them there. Chances are, if you're confused about something, your classmates might be too. So your TAs or I will respond within 48 hours on there. For questions pertaining to your own situation, you can just contact me by email. And lastly, I really don't want to spend much time talking about this one, but the department or the university wants us to put this in our syllabi. So again, there's a provincial mask mandate. I'm vaccinated. Hopefully you are all vaccinated. Hopefully in a few months, this will all just be a bad memory, although who knows, they're saying that this time last year. Anyway, everyone has to wear a mask in class unless you have some sort of waiver allowing you an exemption. Regarding absences, if you're sick with COVID or anything else, please just stay home. Again, you need to take time to take care of yourself, and you also have to protect others. So lecture is going to be made available online for anyone who can attend. But beyond that, accommodations are going to be made available to anyone who has to miss class or lab due to illness. Like, we can give you a Zoom link to hop into the lab, even if it's an in-person lab section. Like, our aim is to be helpful here, but again, you have to communicate that if you are in need. And lastly, just a note on academic integrity. It's really the foundation of the academic enterprise, and so it's very important that you follow the code of conduct regarding academic integrity. Basically, what I mean here is that plagiarism and cheating are going to be taken very seriously. First incident might result in a 0 for the assignment, but if there's further incidents, then it could result in failure of the course. You can follow this link for a more detailed description. Basically, the TLDR is that all work that you submit must be your own original work. You're more than welcome to work on assignments with classmates, but the maps you submit have to be created by you. The write-ups you submit have to be written by you. If those words are generated collaboratively and you work together on something, fine, but do the work yourself. So with that said, I'll just give a quick look at what you can expect from a module. So this is the reason that I am writing all this on GitHub rather than Canvas. I can write all these web pages programmatically and make things a lot more flexible and engaging. So basically, each module is going to have 3 parts. You're going to have content, application, and assessment. Again, this is very much a rough draft. This will look better on Monday at 2 p.m. when I post it. But basically, the content. So for this one, we're going to go over trying to give a holistic introduction to the history of GIS. I'm going to talk about what is GIS, blah, blah, blah. Where does it come from? Give some examples of the evolution of cartography, things like that. And so there will be a couple of different pages. Each one you can kind of work through and look at yourself. Again, these are all just rough drafts so far. In some circumstances, there will be either written submission questions for the assessment or multiple choice questions embedded within this content. And so, yeah. In the content page, you can find basically what we're going to talk about in lecture. And then in the application page, this is more like what you're going to be doing in lab. And so again, for lab 1, basically, we're going to do an intro to ArcGIS. You're going to complete a ArcGIS tutorial, submit a map, and then watch a couple of introductory videos. Then we're going to go through a historical example of GIS with the end goal being to make a map, submit it to Canvas. Now, on the assessment page, you will basically just find a listing of all the questions for the automated and written submissions. Each question here will hyperlink to wherever it is in the application or content page that it's actually asked. So again, this is just a rough draft. It's not finalized, but this is just a broad overview of what you can expect these modules to look like. So when I post this at 2 p.m. on Tuesday, just take a little bit of time. There will be an introductory video here explaining the module, but you should take a little bit of time to look through things. All right, so with that said, that's all I have to talk about today, and I look forward to meeting you all in person next Wednesday.